Good morning. On September the 16th of 1999, the defendant, Amanda Lewis, gave birth to her daughter, Adriana Elaine Hutto. And for the first 6 weeks of her life, they spent it together as a mother and a daughter. But after that, the defendant had to go away. You see, she had entered into the National Guard. She had become pregnant with Adriana. And when she was pregnant, she had to take a maternity leave because she was never able to go to boot camp until after she had the child. When the 6 weeks were over with, she went off for her basic training. And she left her child, her daughter, with her mother, Brenda Burns. For the next 2 or 3 months, Adriana was raised by her grandmother. You're going to hear that while the defendant was there at basic training, she received an injury and she was unable to complete her training there. And so she came back home, moved back in with her mother. And about a year later, she had another child, A.J. Hutto, Andrew Jordan Hutto. For the next 3 years, the defendant and her 2 children lived in the home with her mother. Eventually, she would move out. As Adriana began to grow, she was a happy, healthy child. You will hear that from early on, though, she developed a fear of water. This was obvious to her mother, to her grandmother, to everyone in the family. She didn't like to have water in her face. She didn't like to have water poured over her head. She didn't like to take a bath with much water in the bathtub, just a little bit. As she got older, she didn't really grow out of this problem, as most children will. When she would be taken to the lake or to the beach, she would always play around the edge of the water and didn't like to go into the water. You will hear that Adriana also had other problems. She potty trained on time. But then before she started school, she regressed and she started wetting herself, and she continued to do so up until she ultimately died. You will hear that she had other problems. She was diagnosed with ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. She misbehaved at school. She misbehaved at home. And when she was placed on medicine, depending on who you talked to, that corrected the problem, or it really didn't help that much. Now, in 2005, the defendant decided to move to Esto, Florida, with her children, Adriana and AJ, and she moved in with her boyfriend, Alan Carnley. His 14-year-old son lived there. They lived as a family. You will hear that in the summer of 2007, Alan and the defendant decided that they would buy a pool for the family. They bought one of these inflatable pools. You blow it up, it's an above ground pool. They became pretty popular now. When they got this pool, they realized they needed to set about some rules. No swimming, no playing around this pool unless an adult is present. They even took the ladder to climb into the pool and stored it in a locked shed to keep the children, AJ and Adriana, from getting into the pool. You will hear that this pool was set up, and it was on about as level of ground as they could get out there. The deepest part of the pool was 32 inches on one side, 36 inches on the other side. You will also hear that when the defendant moved to Esto, Florida, she enrolled her daughter in Poplar Springs, and then ultimately, and her son, and ultimately they were transferred to Graceville Elementary School. And she began to work over at the Graceville Nursing Home. Now this would have been in the last part of the spring of 2007. By August of 2007, the defendant was now working at the Bonifay Nursing Home, and her boyfriend, Alan Carnley, was working up at the Slocum at a grocery store up in Slocum, Alabama. Now, he worked the day shift. Occasionally, he would have to go in at 5:30 in the morning. On August the 8th of 2007, he got up at 5 o'clock because that was one of the mornings where he had to go in extra early. He got up at 5, got dressed, and on his way out, he walked past Adriana's room. And he saw her at 5 o'clock, awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk bed in a dark room. He asked her, "Are you okay?" And she didn't respond. He went on down the hall to his son's room, tried to roust his son up. "Look, Alan Michael, I'm going to work. See you when I get home." And he goes to work, clocks in around 5:30 in the morning. That leaves Alan Michael, a 14-year-old, in the house, A.J. Hutto, 6 years old at the time, sleeping in the living room, and Adriana awake on her bed in her bedroom that she shared with A.J. The defendant, as I said, was working at the Bonifay Nursing Home. She usually worked the third shift. That means that she worked from 11 to 7, but on this day, there was some in-service training, so she had to work an extra hour and didn't get off until around 8 o'clock in the morning. She gets home somewhere after 8 o'clock, comes in, and she finds AJ and Adriana awake, watching TV in the living room. She talks with them a little bit. They make plans about what they're going to do that day. They're going to go to town. They've already looked at some school supplies. School is fast approaching, so they're going to go to town and get some school supplies, backpacks, things of that nature. Around 9:30, she goes in her bedroom to lay down and take a nap. She maybe reads a little bit, but she lays down to take a nap. The children stay inside, watch TV. Somewhere around 12:30, 1 o'clock, she gets up. She's slept now 2.5, 3 hours. She talks with the children again. They're watching TV, and by this time they want to go outside and play. So she allows them to go outside and play in the yard. You will see they live in Esto, one of the last houses at the end of the road down there. Although this is a rural area, not much traffic on the road, so she allows them to go outside and play. And they do. They go outside and they start playing in the front yard. AJ is playing with his toy tractors. And you'll see photographs of those toy tractors in a fire truck. And he's playing with these, and he's proud of these because these are some of the only toys that he has. And Adriana may have a doll or two, because you see, a few weeks, just a couple of days earlier, the defendant had gotten frustrated with him. She had told him time and time again, keep these toys picked up. If you don't, I'm going to get rid of them. And so, being true to her word, she took the toys and threw them away. They're out there in the yard playing. The defendant comes out in the yard sometime after 1 o'clock. She tells Adriana that she needs to clean the pool, to clean the bugs out of the pool. Now keep in mind, Adriana is afraid of the water, even at almost 8 years old, because she's 7, about to turn 8 in September. Adriana gets in an argument with her mother. Adriana ends up walking away, going down the road, headed to the park. When her mother finds out about this, she tells AJ, get my keys, get my shoes, and she gets in the car, a red car, and she goes down the road to get Adriana. Now AJ is staying there at the house, so we don't know what happened down the road, but when she gets back, she is continuing, she being the defendant, is continuing to argue with Adriana. At this point, her frustration has reached the breaking point. She's tired. She's frustrated. Adriana did not take her medicine that morning because the defendant forgot to give her her medicine that morning. So she takes her over to the pool. And then you will hear what happens when she got over to the pool that morning. You will hear that she put her in the pool, put Adriana in the pool, and how Adriana was screaming. And AJ could hear Adriana screaming. You will hear also how AJ saw his mother dunk his sister into the pool. Not only will you hear how he saw the defendant dunk his sister, you will hear him describe how he saw the defendant, his mother, place her hand over Adriana's face and push her head in the water as she was screaming. After this happened, AJ has went into the front yard and his mother goes back in the house. She realizes what she has done. She goes inside, and after a while she calls her boyfriend, Alan Carnley. She gets him on the phone. How's things going? Well, we're planning to go inside. And while she's on the phone, she tells AJ to go get his sister. They're getting ready to go. Go get your sister. AJ goes over to the pool. When he gets to the pool, he stands in a wagon and he sees his sister upside down in the pool. And what he means by upside down, he means face down in the pool. Then he goes back and he tells his mother, Adriana's in the pool upside down. The defendant comes out of the trailer. She runs over to the pool. She pulls her daughter out of the pool while she's on the phone with her boyfriend. He tells her to call 911. She calls 911, and within 2 to 3 minutes after the 911 call comes in, the people from the Esto Fire Department, the Chief Charles Corcoran, he just happens to be outside by this fire truck that day, his emergency vehicle, and they respond immediately to the home and get there, like I say, within 2, 3, 4 minutes of when the call came in. He immediately, when he arrives, he gets the defendant away from Adriana, the little girl, and he begins to perform CPR. You will hear how other people arrived soon after that. Now, Jose Martinez was with him, but you'll hear about the other people that arrived within minutes. And we're talking about Larry Cook and his son Travis Cook, who is an EMT. You'll hear how as soon as they arrived, they took over the resuscitation efforts. And within minutes, then you had other rescuers arrive. And we're talking about the paramedic, Greg Barton and Shay McCormick. You will hear about the efforts that they made to try to resuscitate and revive Adriana. They got her in the ambulance. They made plans to have her life flighted to a hospital because they knew it would take too long if they drove. And before the helicopter arrived, they actually got what they believed to be a pulse. So they were optimistic that they would be able to save Adriana's life. You will hear that she was placed in the Earhart helicopter and taken to Bay Medical down in Panama City. And then you will hear what happened once she arrived in Panama City. But before I get to that, let me back up just a moment. We intend to call each and every person who touched or had contact with Adriana that day. and let them tell you not only what they did to try to save her life, but also what they observed from the first person who got there until the last person that tried to save her life. They will tell you when they first started working on her, they saw a bruise on her forehead, right in this area right here. And then as the treatments progressed, we were there at the hospital before when I left off, you will hear that Dr. Fox was waiting with the emergency room team. They knew that Adriana was on the way. They knew a little bit of the history about the case, what had happened, an alleged drowning. So they were ready. And for the next hour or so, hour and 5 minutes, I believe, they performed everything they could to try to save her life. At one point, they had her on the respirator and they had a pulse. But then you will hear how all of those efforts failed, and they had to start CPR again, and her heart flatlined, and they finally pronounced her dead about 5 o'clock, 5:05 that afternoon. You will also hear what else was happening in this case during this time period. Because when the 911 came in to the sheriff's office and the rescue workers, not only did the EMTs and the paramedics respond, the sheriff's office also responded out to this house. And when they got there that day, they tried to find out what had happened. They made arrangements for the defendant to be taken down to the hospital by the victim advocate. They also began to photograph the area to document the scene. That's the reason we know the depth of the pool on that day. 32 inches in one side, 36 on the other. You will also hear that the grandparents were called, Chuck and Brenda Burns, and they came to the residence that day, and they got AJ and decided, look, we'll take him to our home up in Hartford, we'll take care of him. And they did so. You will also hear that on the way home, he was riding with the man that he knew as Pa Chuck, Miss Burns' husband. And on the way up there, he told Mr. Burns what he had seen that evening. When Mr. Burns gets to Hartford, he's concerned about this. He talks with his wife, and then he calls the sheriff's department. They tell them, look, I've talked to this young boy. We think you need to talk to him about what has happened here. And they bring AJ to the sheriff's department, where he gives them a statement. That statement is tape recorded, and the majority of it is even video recorded. After the statement is taken, the statement begins about 5:06. Keep in mind, Adriana was pronounced dead about 5:05. The statement begins about 5:06 and lasts for about 40 minutes. But after the statement is over with, the investigators decide to travel down to Bay County and make contact with the mother and talk to her. They do so. When they get down there, before they talk to the mother, though, they go in and they look at Adriana's body, because they've requested that it be preserved right there, so they can look at it before the funeral home is called or before it's taken to the morgue for an autopsy. When they get there, she's covered up with a sheet. They go in there and they look at her, and by now these bruises are more pronounced, and they can see the outline of a handprint on Adriana's face. A handprint in the same form and in the same area where AJ has demonstrated and will tell you that he saw his mother place her hand over the victim's face. They continue to investigate this case. An autopsy is done. It's performed by Dr. Charles Siebert, who at that time was the medical examiner for the 14th Circuit. You will hear that the cause of death was in fact drowning, and the manner of death was a homicide. You will hear the testimony of Dr. Andy Minyard, who is now the acting medical examiner, that in her opinion, the cause of death was drowning, manner of death, homicide. The case continued to be investigated. The case was not based just on the bruises that were on Adriana's face. The officers set about to see whether or not they could corroborate some of the things AJ had said. He talked about there being an Army man in a helicopter that day. The officers corroborated through FDLE and the U.S. Army that there were helicopters flying from Fort Rooker in the Esto area at the time that this incident was taking place. Now, we got a time frame here of about from 1:30 to 2:30. The officers continued to investigate. It was advised them that the defendant was on the phone when AJ told her about Adriana being in the pool. They confirmed through telephone records and through the boyfriend that in fact the defendant was on the telephone when AJ told her about this. You will also hear the other efforts that they made. For instance, not only was there Army men in a helicopter that day, AJ relates that there was a man on a tractor in the area that day. Officers from the sheriff's office went out and talking to people in Esto. It's a small community. They were able to go out and find not only was there a man on a tractor, they found the man that was on that tractor that day, Scott Kirkland. He was mowing the right-of-way for the utility company that day. And he was there in that area around 1 o'clock or a little after lunchtime that day. There was testimony that Adriana had gotten in trouble. You will hear testimony that Adriana had gotten in trouble that morning for spraying a cleaner in the trailer, a glass cleaner, something that looks like Windex. A search warrant was obtained. And on that bottle of Windex that they found, well, actually it's not Windex, it's Glass Plus, was Adriana's fingerprint. You'll hear other efforts that were made to corroborate AJ's statement to see whether or not it would hold up to scrutiny. Listen for this as the case goes on, because again, as I told you during jury selection, this is a 7-year-old boy who at the time was 6 and he turned 7 in November. So listen to those things as the case develops. Obviously you know that this case will involve a number of witnesses. You heard the names of all the witnesses, maybe as many as 30 witnesses. But there won't be 30 eyewitnesses to the actual event that led to Adriana's death. There will only be one witness, and that is little AJ Hutto. And from jury selection, you know that his credibility is going to be called into question. Whether or not he's making this up or using that word that the defense used, fabricating or fabulation or whatever it is. You use your common sense as you're going through this and scrutinize his testimony. See if it mounts up and see if it's worthy of belief. Pretty much the gist of our case, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not telling you we have cameras that's going to show you photographs of this happening or a video of this happening. We don't have that. We've got the testimony of these witnesses, and hopefully by giving you this outline, you can understand it as the evidence is presented during the trial. Some of the witnesses we may have to take out of order to accommodate their schedules. Just please be patient with us. We're also going to present the testimony of a 7-year-old little boy in a big courtroom such as this with people. He's going to come in here and you're going to be total strangers to him. But he's going to try to do his best when he gets up here. I'm not asking you to believe him just because he comes in here. I'm asking to you just to be patient and listen to his testimony and then give it the credibility that you determine that it deserves. And depending on whether or not it agrees or disagrees with the other evidence in the case. And the next time I get back up here, I'm going to be speaking directly to you, and that will be in closing arguments. And I'm going to ask you to return the highest verdict supported by the evidence. I'm going to ask you to return a verdict of guilty as charged. Because you see, that day, that afternoon on August the 8th of 2007, the defendant was a mother, but she was also tired. She was also frustrated. And when she went out there that day to punish or to discipline her child, her emotions got the better of her that day. You will hear that she never thought she bonded with this child. She talked to her workers and family and knew that she didn't love her like she should. And that day, something snapped. That's what led to the death of Adriana Elaine Hutto. Thank you for your attention.
I would agree that something snapped in this case, but what snapped was common sense. This case is fraught with a lack of common, everyday sense in evaluating what happened out there that afternoon. There's a fundamental tenet in science that states that the simplest explanation is usually the correct explanation. We don't need a complicated series of events based on the misperceptions of a 6-year-old child to arrive at the answer of what happened to Adriana Hutto. It's very simple. The physical evidence will establish it. She went outside that afternoon to play. Her mother kept an eye on her because she's a problem child. She has ADHD, she's on meds, she also has behavioral problems. She has been physically violent. She's attacked her younger brother, AJ, with a knife. She ended up in a mental hospital because of this behavior. So her mother keeps an eye on her because she doesn't know what she's going to do. So when she got home, she took her nap and she got up, she let the kids go outside to play because they had plans. They were going to go to Dothan, they were going to go not grocery shopping, but school shopping. They were going to get something to eat on the way, so she didn't fix lunch for them that day. But she did permit them to go outside. She saw her son, AJ, playing in the tree. She saw her daughter outside. They seemed to be playing together. Everything seemed fine. So she did what every mother does. She started cleaning up the house. And this is all corroborated by a 14-year-old who is in the house and who knows what's happening. She's doing laundry. She's cleaning up the house. She's taking a shower. She's getting ready to take the kids to Dothan to go school shopping. When she's on the phone to her boyfriend in Slocum, she's telling him what the plans are for that day. At that moment, while she is on the telephone with her boyfriend, AJ comes running up to the house saying Adriana is upside down in the pool. Of course, like every mother, she gets hysterical. She runs out to the pool. She's still on the phone with her boyfriend who hears what's happening. He says, put down the phone, call 911. She gets the child out of the pool. She's able to lean into the pool, bring the child to her, get her out, get her on the ground. She knows she's blue. She knows this is a life-threatening situation. Within minutes, Chief Corcoran is there. She's full of water. She's full of vomit. He tries to clear an air passage, tries to revive her, but he knows what's happened. He knows this child has drowned. The child's mother is so distraught. She's throwing up. She's hysterical. She's crying. She can't believe she has found her daughter floating face down in the swimming pool. How could this have happened? The physical evidence tells us what happened. For whatever reason, it was customary if the family was going to go swimming in that pool to clean the bugs out. There's a net for that purpose. Anyone who's ever had a pool The leaves, the bugs, everything flowed on the surface of the pool. The net was locked up in the shed, along with a ladder. Now this is an above ground pool. It's about 4 feet off the ground. You can't get into it unless you have a ladder. Because you know what? If you get on top of the pool, it collapses. There's a ring, an inflatable ring. This is a blue Walmart pool. You've seen them out in backyards all over the county. You can't get in them unless you have a ladder. The ladder is an A-shaped affair, just like a household ladder. You climb up from the outside, you get down in the pool on the other side by walking down the steps. If you try to get in the pool by climbing over it, it doesn't work because the pool collapses and the water flows over the edge of the pool. So for whatever reason, Adriana Hutto got it in her head that she was going to get the bugs out of the pool. Now how could she get in the pool? Well, there's a little red wagon. You'll see in the photos. It's up next to the pool. And guess what? The wagon is full of water. It was filled with sand. It's full of water. It's full of mud. And all around the little red wagon, there's water on the ground. What she tried to do was stand in that wagon, and she obtained a little tray that was on the side of the pool that the family would stand in. They would fill it with water, they would stand in it so they get the grass off their feet so they could get in the pool. Now that item should have been on the outside of the pool on the ground. You'll see it in the photos. It's in the pool. It shouldn't have been there. The only inference you can draw from that is that Adriana picked up that little tray, stood in that red wagon, and commenced to get the bugs out of the pool by scooping them up. In the process, she leaned on that inflatable ring, which collapsed. She goes headfirst in the pool, the water comes over the ring that's been depressed into that red wagon, and she goes headfirst into the pool. Now Adriana is just like every other kid. They like to be around water, they're fascinated by water, but at the same time she never learned how to swim, she never learned how to hold her head under the water, and when her mother or Alan Carnley tried to teach her these skills, she would panic. She just did not like the idea of her head being under the water. Now what you'll learn from the medical doctors is probably something you haven't appreciated before, but someone can drown in seconds because the mechanism of drowning is not how long you can hold your breath or how long you can stay underwater, but whether water actually enters the lungs, because that's what causes death. The water enters the lungs cannot function, and within a very short period of time, oxygen is cut off to the brain and to the other parts of the body, and you can succumb very quickly. So if she went into the pool, like I suggest she did, and she panicked and she inhaled water, she could immediately cause her death by accidental drowning. And we submit that is precisely what happened. Now, what the state posits is that no, this is a much more complicated affair. And the only witness that they can offer to support a claim of homicide is, of course, A.J. Hutto. Now, his story is very convoluted. It's very inconsistent. But one thing that he says happened that day was that they were in the house and he was asleep and he smelled some spray in the house, and his mom got mad with his sister and said, "Stop that spraying or I'm going to dunk you." And so he suggests that for some reason his mother was going to punish Adriana by dunking her in the pool. He says that his mother took her outside and threw her in the pool. Somehow she got out of the pool. She went somewhere else. His mother went and got her and brought her back and threw her in the pool again. So not only did she drown him once, or drown her daughter once, but twice. And in other statements, he says his mother drowned his sister 4 times. But you know what's consistent with his story is that he never saw it. He told the police he never saw it. I just heard it. I heard her screaming. But he never says he actually saw it. Yet we know from other witnesses that the incident with the spray happened days, if not weeks earlier, because it involved her boyfriend, Alan Carnley, who had brought some things home from work, and the kids were playing with it. And some of it was some kind of spray, some kind of cleaning solution. And Adriana got in trouble for that. But that wasn't that day. But yet, that's what he says precipitated the whole incident that day. And that his mother physically threw his sister in the pool, that somehow she got out, which would have been impossible because there's no ladder there for her to get out, and that she ran to a park, or she ran to the bus stop, or he doesn't know where she went, he just speculates where she went, and then Mommy brought her back. And then when he's asked, where were you when this is going on, at one time he says, I'm in the garbage can tree. Well, there's a tree out front of the house where the garbage can sits. You cannot see the pool from the garbage can tree. Another time he says he's sitting on the front steps of the porch. Again, you cannot see the swimming pool from where he says he was sitting. And, as I said earlier, he denies ever seeing his mother drown his sister. And he demonstrates how it happened, but he says he never saw it. And the way he says it happened doesn't comport with common sense either. If one were to attempt to drown another person, the easiest thing to do is grab them behind the back of the head and hold their head underwater. They're defenseless. They can't fight back. You definitely have the upper hand if you were going to drown somebody. He says he will describe probably his mother, because he never saw it. He's imagining this is how you drown somebody. You put your hand on their face and you hold them under the water somehow. She has no injuries, no scratches on her. I think the medical evidence will be that anyone who's in that situation, child, adult, it doesn't matter, they're going to panic and they're going to struggle. And so this leads us to some of the other physical findings that they say, well, this corroborates a homicide. And they talk about the bruises. They say, well, there's bruises. Well, the first EMT saw one bruise in the middle of the forehead. How it got there, we don't have a clue. But we do know the 2 kids would physically fight one another. So who knows how that bruise on the middle of the forehead got there? She could have got it falling into the pool. She could have got it because her brother whacked her with a toy gun that he had out there playing that day. In fact, in one of his statements, he talks about hitting himself or getting hit with his fire truck and blood coming all over his body from getting hit with a fire truck. So on occasion, these kids would hit each other. But there's a bruise there. And then the medical examiner says, well, there's also something on the back of the head, so I think whoever killed her had to put enough force on the front of the face to cause the bruising, and then had to press the face onto a hard surface like concrete to cause damage to the back of the head. That's totally inconsistent with what AJ says, but that's their explanation for how these injuries occurred. Yet the same medical examiner says, well, all these bruises happen at the same time. And he'll tell you, well, I can tell that by the color of the bruises, which is total hogwash. Medically, you can't tell the age of bruises by their color. You can't tell whether they happened at once or at different times. The only thing you can say about bruises is they start off as red or blue and they end up brown. And yet the same medical examiner in his autopsy report uses different colors to describe the bruises. So they couldn't all happen at the same time because they're all different colors. They say there's a pattern there. Oh, it looks like a hand. Well, you can look at the bruises and say, well, they don't look like any kind of pattern at all. If you want to you can force yourself to believe that's the bruise of a hand, but how do you press somebody's face so hard that you leave a bruise on it? Don't leave any fingernail marks. And yet, AJ's description has nothing to do with that. She couldn't have left bruises the way that AJ says it happened, and the way the medical examiner says that it could have happened. They're inconsistent. They'll tell you that she has what are called petechiae in her eyes. These are small capillaries that rupture in the eye, and they make little pinpoint red dots. And the medical examiner will tell you, well, that's inconsistent with drowning. Well, unfortunately, he didn't bother to do any research, and the research shows that petechiae are seen when kids drown. So he's going to miss the boat on that. He also says you can get them anytime they're struggling. Okay, he relates petechiae to struggling, but he also says, you know how you get it? From vomiting. And this child was full of vomit. She had vomit all over. The EMTs smelled it. They cleared her air passages. So petechiae, which the state will claim is indicative of a homicide, occur not only naturally, but they occur through the process of vomiting. So all of these suspicious findings that lead them to conclude that it's a homicide, I submit, will be refuted by other witnesses and other evidence that basically says you can't read too much into these findings. And lastly, there's an injury that nobody can explain, which is in the vaginal area of this child. There was an abrasion out near, not in an area where medical people would have been concerned with. Nobody suggests that this was an injury caused by medical treatment. But it seems to be in an area that is consistent with what you see in sexual abuse of children. And not only that, Dr. Siebert went further and examined this abraded area in the vaginal area microscopically and saw that there was healing taking place. And when that finding is made, it means the injury is at least an hour, 2 hours old. So on the one hand, you have physical injuries that can be explained away, or, as the state suggests, are the product of some kind of injury that is inflicted upon this child. But they don't explain how these injuries occurred within a couple hours of death. She is responsible for the abrasion to the vaginal area. No one is going to suggest she sexually molested her child that day, or that anything of that nature had ever happened before. But if you take all the injuries and look at them in sum, either they lack the necessary probative value to show that she committed a homicide, but they also point in another direction. Because guess what? She doesn't have her panties on. Adriana does not have her panties on, and they find blood in her shorts. She did not do that. So the evidence in this case will either point to an accidental drowning or a homicide by a sexually motivated person. That's the only two explanations that you can conclude from the evidence that's going to be presented in this case. She didn't sexually abuse her daughter, and she most certainly didn't throw her in the swimming pool to punish her for spraying Windex in the house. This is either a purely accidental drowning or something much more diabolical than that nobody can explain. Because nobody can explain, you will hear not one person say how that abrasion in the vaginal area occurred, but everyone agrees it is highly suspicious and it is suggestive of some act of sexual abuse. Even though there was not penetration, even though there's not semen, there's no other medical findings, no one can explain why this child is face down in the swimming pool with her panties off and an abrasion in her vaginal area and blood on her shorts. She didn't do it. This case, really, from the state's perspective, begins and ends with the testimony of A.J. Hutto. And I can't tell you what he's going to say when he comes in here. He's 7 years old. He may not say a word, or he may say things that we've never heard about. But I do know, based on what he has said in the past, that his story totally lacks reliability, it's totally inconsistent, and it could not have happened the way that he says that it happened. That's the bottom line. All the other evidence suggests, with the exception of that vaginal abrasion, that this was an accidental drowning. All the other evidence suggests that she played no part in the death of her daughter. And she's entitled to the presumption of innocence, which we agreed we would apply in this case. And the state in no way will prove, beyond and to the exclusion of all reasonable doubt, that she most wickedly and cruelly drowned her daughter to death. Thank you.